Rocco. I think you can request your video and we can get all that stuff going.
Hey,
Rocco,
live and direct.
what's up, man? Let's just do a little sound check here. How you doing? You can hear me good?
I'm good, yeah. You can hear me good?
All right, perfect. Sorry, I'm just dealing with this makeshift. There we go. I think that's pretty straight for all of you that are obsessed with lines. I think we're pretty good. Anyway, if it gets bad, I'll just lean this way and Rocco can lean that way and we'll balance out.
Yeah.
So thanks, Rocco, for joining me for this first session. And I don't know if there's going to be many sessions or multiple sessions, but it's something that I've kind of played around with personally. And in my sometimes just taking a camera and cruising around the streets as I put on my Instagram live, where I just kind of like studying people in general. For those of you that have no idea who I am, that's totally fine. It's not what this is about. But I'm basically a yoga educator. I've been doing this for nearly 20 years. And so one of the things that I did in my personal approach is that rather than looking into schools like 200 hour, 300 hour, 500 hour, whatever, I was more of an immersive student, which means that I was initiated into my fields of study, from hatha to siddha to medicine to mantra, etc., etc., etc. And so along the way, fast forwarding through all of that stuff and getting to where I am now, along the way I meet really interesting people. And so I have this idea of doing what is called a satsang. And so satsang is not an uncommon thing. It's something that we do in yoga, right? We sit around and classically talk about texts, consciousness, spirituality. These particular topics classically are just as important as things like asana. Or the physical postures. And when you look at the two words, it essentially is basically taking the company of someone, in this scenario, having the company of my friend Rocco, and the idea of truth, right? So truth is an interesting word because we tend to look at truth as truth and lies, rather than the idea that there is the truth, which is, existence or consciousness or whatever it may be. And then there's someone who keeps company with that, right? So you have these interesting people in the world, I find, who really like walk and move with their truths. And so that's kind of what our conversation is about here. Rocco, you sent me your bio, and one of the things that comes off right away and I don't know if this is like, the best, most great place to start, because, I'm not a professional interviewing people, so we're all just winging it. But one of the things that comes off right away in Rocco's bio is, he's the son of a very, well-known to some people. I mean, in my generation, he was, that wasn't the music we like listened to. But right before that, if I talk to my folks, and people obviously know he's the son of this, well-known musician. And then on the other side, you have your mom, who is very much like about health and about the mind and about like all these other things. And then, and it's funny because I was reading that and I'm doing like, research on your background and your family, and I only know you, right? I'm not like, it's like I'm not personal friends with your any of your family members, or I've never followed like your father or your mom or anything. I just know you as, this guy, my friend, my brother, my student, and many other words in between. And I'm reading about the historical piece of these people, and then I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally Rocco, like put together. So that's where we are. We're with this amazing Rocco Moon, and we're getting into some dialogue. So I'm just gonna jump right into it. Rocco, what like really brought you into this? What came first, the music or the seeking, like for you personally?
Man, I think they happened around the same time. Uh, I didn't really do anything artistically until I moved out of the house. And I think you could probably get into the psychological reasons for that. Um,
Mm.
but once I was by myself, I became aware of, I think, two different things around the same time. One was my desire to, well, it was like a new version of the same desire, which was to be my own person. Because like I grew up in this, yeah, shadow basically of like, oh, you're so and
Mm.
so's addendum. You're an addendum of another human. You're not really your own human. And so
Sure.
I was like, basketball is gonna be the thing where I'm gonna break through the ceiling of the Willy Wonka factory, and I'm gonna become my own person that way, and then I started being by myself, and sadness started coming up, and I hadn't really, I had experienced, I think, this spectrum of emotions, but in terms of being by myself, all of a sudden sadness merged with this desire to be my own unique person, and I think it brought about this new like desire to be vulnerable. And I noticed that that wasn't necessarily like, shout out to my dad and all of his expressions, but he wasn't necessarily like playing etudes and preludes and, weeping minor tones. Like, you know, melancholy wasn't really his vibe. And, but then this dude named Kid Cudi came out in around 2009, and I got this inspiration to like be, I think it was like, yeah, be honest, is like really be honest with the emotions I was experiencing. But I also realized that that wasn't a sustainable identity, and I didn't want to just be sad. So I kind of wanted to understand why I was sad. And they kind of got like woven into some, uh, yeah, mutual path, some harmonious path to being like, I want to express my way through this, but I also want to find some kind of resolution for this that feels like it's a bigger puzzle in general. Yeah.
Do you think that like when you run into those, and one of the, the points of this, conversation is to talk about, kind of how we find contentment and those things in our life, well, right? So like there's a point where you I mean, at least I have found, I don't know if this is for you, but there's a point where like when you're in this heaviness, let's say, that sort of like mentally you have this like this choice. Maybe it's not even a choice. Maybe it's sort of more like, you have this way about you, and then you have like what you could do. Like, and so it's sort of like, I'll give an example. Like maybe you're in a relationship or whatever, and your heart is broken. So in your mind, you're like, I'm never gonna like become vulnerable again. I'm just gonna like, see people, and then that's the end of the story. But then there's like a part of you that's like, you can't do that, right? Like it's not possible. It's not possible to do that. And when you do, when you do that particular thing, it often feels like wrong is not the right word, but let's just say that it's the word for right now. That it's not. It moves against your essence or your being.
Something's
You
off.
know what I mean?
Yeah, something's off.
Yeah. So do you think that in those, crux-like positions that you tend to feel your dharma, if you want to call it that, your purpose is like enhanced? Well, I'm not saying it becomes easy, but do you think it becomes enhanced, or are we mentally looking for an escape route into something else?
Are you in? Are
Because
you?
you took this thing and you're like, wow, I have basketball and I'm going to do this other thing. But, it's potential that the basketball um, was a covering for the fact that you also are a musical artist.
Right. And then, so just to be clear, so are you kind of asking like, does the dark night of the soul kind of show us the 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 fork in the road, kind of like this way or that way? Is that kind of the idea?
I'm talking about more like when you get to the fork in the road, like, and that inner dialogue, the deep one, not your mental mind frame. They're both simultaneously having a conversation, you
Right.
know. And one's like, go right, because if you go right, you'll never have to deal with this pain again. And the other one is like, you know what? But my path is left, and that's your argument.
Man, this brings in this concept of faith that has been coming up. Um, I think it came up in one of our recent sadhanas, you touched on it a little bit, but this idea of faith as being like, I think at that point, when I was genuinely at that intersection, I literally had failed a physical, and they were like, you got to sit out and you can't go back to practice. And they said something was wrong with my heart. And in that 2 weeks, like all this divine, it literally felt like auspicious, it's too perfect almost kind of vibe. Like I felt like I had asked for a sign, and it was like, here's your sign. And I was like, wow. And I felt like it was the direct, and as you know, I'm writing a lot right now, and it's like there's this really potent moment in my story where I was like, this is the thing that people have called faith. And then it felt like that was the moment for me at that fork in the road where it was literally like this was almost being taken out as an option even. And it was like nature was showing me like, this is I didn't have these words back then, but like, this is a timeline that was only meant to get you to hear, and even now it's like basketball is such a phenomenal part of my music. It's like a basketball introduced me to hip hop, and even watching this Michael Jordan Last Dance thing recently, like I forgot how impacted I was seeing him as an archetype, like red jersey, number 23, it was a huge part of why I wanted to be the kind of archetype that I wanted to be, I guess. So yeah, does that answer kind of what you're pointing at?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it also leads us to this idea of like, being, content. Like when faith is there, we often find ourselves content, right? Because, we're not necessarily trying to change the landscape to suit what we think is necessary, right? It's more about embracing that landscape and getting into, whatever that may be. So I think this is really interesting that, you're bringing up a lot of the stuff of the shadow, and, for people who might be listening to this and are not really so aware of that. I think that a lot of the shadow work, though, in particular, lead to something that I think is like completely, amazing about you. When we first started working together, Rocco and I, he was in my advanced training program. We still work together. And then since that time, like in seeing him do his work, one day he came up to me and he's like, I have this thing, it's called moon theory. And I was like, thinking like, what is he talking about? And then, fast forward to like now, and I actually sent Rocco an article recently, and it was more about generations and stuff like that. But it did highlight a really interesting aspect of a particular generation, and this idea of, what we tend to know now is what's called this FOMO. And so, Rocco, tell about how, like, because for me, like, I'm not from your generation, so for me, FOMO is this like an acronym that, kids use to describe the idea of fear of missing out on something. And, it can really seem like that doesn't really mean anything to me. Like if I'm honest about it, I can be like, that doesn't mean anything. Maybe it's generational, maybe because my generation was like, screw you, we're going to do what we want. But like, when we look at this idea and the way that you put it as like, looking at it for me, like just being like a writer and, all these other things in my life, and I just see those letters, FOMO, it's like, okay, whatever. But like, talk to me about it the way that you told me about it the first time. Like what that actually is. Like tell me like what that means. What that meant to you, what you saw from it.
So I've been unraveling what I saw initially. I grew up loosely Christian, I'll say, and then I had a moment where basically it felt like Christianity just wasn't allowing me to be as I really was. And I stepped back, and then actually yoga brought me back to the teachings of this person that was called Yeshua, but they called him Jesus, and it was all this wild stuff. But I remember it was around this, dark night of the soul moment where I was at that fork in the road, and I started staying awake at night. And I prayed pretty consistently, and I would, I didn't know where else to go sometimes for advice. And I was raised to, when all else fails, you pray. And I would pray, and I'd be like, what is the sign? What am I supposed to be doing? What's the right way? And I kept hearing this voice and this idea, and it said, look at the moon until you understand me. And I was like, what is that even talking about? And then it turned into this acronym of like, well, the moon is a mirror for the only light that exists. And I was like, all right, well, I mean, well, how does that deal with me? And then this term FOMO popped up, and I was like, whoa, that is what that's what separation consciousness is. It's like this feeling of being separate from the world, being separate from fulfillment, being separate from literally the experience of living life itself. And I had this character in my life in such close proximity that was so like gung ho, no pun intended, of living their fullest blissful iteration of life possible. And, you know, damned anybody if they're going to try and stop that person on living their bliss. And I was like, wow, they're not missing out on anything. But me, and then I looked around and I saw most of humanity. You know, I got to meet a handful of really cool people that were friends with my dad, you know, the Steven Tylers and the Kid Rocks of the world. And I was like, man, there's only a handful of folks who are really fulfilled. Most of us are kind of like, you know, walking through the forest, you know, looking under rocks, like, where do I belong? You know, what's it? Or even if they found it, is this it? And it was this feeling, I saw this collective kind of, you know, the quantum physics languaging wants to call it like a core fractal, and the like harmonic field, the quantum universe was showing me this kind of glitch, a glitch in the matrix is how I've been writing about it. And that it's not always a fear of missing out. And there's literally a sentence that keeps coming through me. It's like FOMO is way more than an acronym. And it's not always fear. It doesn't always come across as fear of missing out. Sometimes it's just the experience of missing out. But I've noticed that is like, it's this feeling of being incomplete and like unable to be satiated in any experience. So you want to hang out with your friends, you go to your friends, and then you feel like you missed out on staying home. You stay home, and then your friends go out and you don't go out with them, and you feel like you missed out on them. And I definitely found myself in that scenario, and I talked around, and it seemed like every person that experienced depression, which I was really thick in of at the time between 2010 and 2013 intensely. And it all really like crescendoed when I had a dear friend of mine take his own life. And I was like, whoa, that's, you know, there's no reset. There's no start over. There's no try again. And I had even found myself inching towards that idea of like, maybe that's easier. You know, in terms of like dealing with intense suffering, dealing with intense depression, what's the idea to how to navigate that? And some were like, I'm out. And I was like, whoa, that is a choice. And it led to this ancient phrase I'd heard, never really looked at deeper, of like, to be or not to be. And it seemed like this word, this acronym, MOON, it was telling me to miss out on nothing, to be that which I felt like was missing. And that was, whether my dad knew it or whether somebody who was really successful knew that that's what they were doing or not, they weren't missing out on life. They were embracing life. They were living life. And so, yeah, FOMO is a little bit more than an acronym to me. It's kind of like a wormhole into the core root cause of depression itself.
Yeah, I mean, the more I read about it, you know, not about FOMO, I mean, obviously, but about some of these things that you and I share with each other, articles and stuff like that. And we're looking at, you know, generational trends, and the best word that, you know, can be described for the things that are sort of like growing in a potentially, you know, positive and also negative impact, things that you're, you know, bringing up, like depression, or this idea of fear on missing out, of being at home if you go out, or being with your friends if you stay home. You know, I think that for, you know, previous generations, like I was saying, like we didn't have that. I think a lot of us were just really excited to not ever come back home. You know, and that was kind of the end of the story. But I love that that when we look at this, it actually is it really is showing up in fields of study as like an epidemic, essentially, with, you know, these younger populations of people, generation, you know, your generation is a generation underneath you as well. And that you also had the time to reflect. I mean, it wasn't like a conscious thing you were doing, essentially. You know, you developed this relationship with your faith, you did what you knew how to do, which was pray, and something came out of that, and it was like you have like an antidote for FOMO, right? Like the whole idea of moon theory is again not just an acronym; it's missing out on nothing. You know, we've seen like variations of this in philosophies, in religions as well, is connecting to that. But I think one of the interesting things that are really fascinating about some of the simplicity of just like the idea of missing out on nothing versus using words like consciousness, or even an awakening mind, or enlightenment, or to have God in your heart, or to do these things, is that it's an approachable ideology that anyone can come to, while simultaneously they can embrace any theism that might come along with it, right? Because we could miss out on nothing by participating in faith-based things, but we could also miss out on nothing by doing other things. I mean, I'm fragmenting a little bit here because this is obviously what you focus in your expertise on developing a whole program about that. So those of you that are listening and you see Rocco Moon here, you can follow him on Instagram if you're not already, and he has his link tree and all kinds of awesome stuff that he offers here. How did that construct like work its way into you? I mean, I think we could see how it works with your background and then into your spirituality, but how does that work its way into your music?
Kid Cudi.
Yeah.
Have you ever really dove into his discography?
I have not dove into him, but I have listened to Kid Cudi, yeah.
Okay, two things here. Stoicism, one.
Mm-hmm.
The evolution of the emotional apex alpha male. So there's two things I prior to Kanye West 808 and Heartbreak, you had people like Freddie Mercury and Bowie and Prince and Michael, and I'm sure there's a long list of artists who are male, but also basically confidently sensitive. And
Okay.
and like I had seen a lot of the masculine stuff, right? I had seen a lot of the intense, almost like warrior thing. And then this dude Kid Cudi is rapping about, I'm up all night by myself, I'm alone, and you know what? Whatever. This is what my path is, and sometimes I don't get the girl because I'm too nice, and they say the nice guys finish last. Oh well, at least I'm still me. And I was like, whoa, how is this? It felt like it evolved my concept of what a man could be. And it felt like I was resisting my own innate quality to be kind of a sensitive, whatever goofball or aspects and subtleties of my character that were true for me, but that for whatever reason, social or otherwise, I was resisting. And so it started off, I was just looking for a cool rap name, because I had a couple scenarios where I went to some auditions in LA trying to be an actor and stuff, and I remember this one is it's like the classic story for me, at least part of my if this were the Avengers, this would definitely be a moment in my origin story movie. And like I'm at this agent, and they're like, I'm outside waiting, and then they're like, all right, he'll see you. And I go in, and they've been looking at my bio or whatever, and I'm walking in the door, and it's in West Hollywood, and the guy's like, wow, I didn't think any name could get worse than your last name, but your middle name really does the trick. And I was like, okay, where are we going with this conversation from here? Which my middle name is after one of the most famous gun companies in existence, Winchester. And so I was looking for a different name, to be honest. I was looking for a name to what's a cool rapper name, And this word, because Cudi was talking about it, I was starting to be nocturnal. It seemed like also this dude named Thelonious Monk super influenced it. Something
Sure.
about this late night jazz offness. He wasn't pleasant to my ears at first, but he was hitting these chords, and it was like I was learning something, even though I didn't necessarily find it pleasant at first. So it was like the nocturnal meets the sensitive meets this. I was looking for a philosophy to embody and become. And my name was Thelonious Moon. I rapped as Thelonious Moon for like probably like, I don't know, a year or some months or something. And after a while, I kept noticing that acronym was powerful. Like, miss out on nothing. That seems to imply something really cool. And the more I got into the mystic Christianity stuff, it pointed at this merger with God consciousness. It sounds like missing out on nothing. I find this Buddhism stuff, and it seems like, dissolve suffering, dissolve these, the identity that finds itself to be separate. I was like, sounds like missing out on nothing. Come to yoga, union, merger, and it sounds like nothing. It's like all towards this wholeness, towards some modality that will assist us in being fulfilled. So, I forgot exactly what the question was, but it was somewhere along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we really need to get into questions and answers. I mean,
Right.
I think it's one of the retreats that you came back from with me, and then you released your blown away video.
Yeah, after
right?
a while.
And so for me, it was fascinating to share the space of like watching that with a bunch of other people who were, whatever you want to call them, quote unquote yogis, right?
Yeah.
Because with that word, it's such a weird word. I think overall, like I'm on so many interviews with people, and they're like, "Tell us what yoga is to you." And I think that it's like if everyone's doing all these asanas, then it's not that, because the question would be solved already, right? So like, I think more like when we look at questions, it's like how we can really get to connect and know each other. And when we tie it back to this, why I'm so fascinated about one aspect of the pulse that you kind of have your finger on is the connectedness that can be created through these things, whether it's in your writing, it's in your music. But I want to back up a little bit, because I think this is really awesome that what happened for you is you experienced someone with sensitivity in which is essentially the non-typical archetype in the male world, right? It's not favored. If you're at a certain age or a certain culture, you're actually told not to have particular feelings. You're edged against that. Grow up strong, and
Don't cry.
your
Don't
connectivity to no crying. Your connectivity to other people is especially with like if you're I don't know what it's like to grow up as a gay man, but as a straight man, you're sometimes you're often taught slightly that women are like your conquest. Those things are okay. The other way around, it's this is classical. I think that's changing a little bit too. But there's also the flip side of it too, like male toxicity. We don't talk about like female toxicity. And when we look at the studies of hormones, we haven't actually seen that like these things that we call toxic behavior actually have any correlation at all to testosterone, or the other things. So this is like a cliche name in which we use. So rather than actually like talk about those things and integrate them, but I think what is fascinating is that you, for lack of better words, fell in love with the idea that someone was speaking their truth.
Nice.
Right?
True. Yes.
And that, just hearing that truth led to not only like obviously excitement for potentially speaking your own truth, because I think that's what happens when you hear someone talk the truth. I think sometimes you hear someone say the truth, you're not like, oh my God, I need to follow that. I think it's more interesting if someone says something that's true to you, and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I want to like do that same thing. I want to speak.
I see it as the ultimate permission slip.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you get it's the hall pass of all hall passes.
Yeah.
You don't have to report back to what you're supposed to be reporting to, right? Now you're reporting to this new thing. And so I think this new thing, for some people is our own consciousness, our own awareness, or whatever it may be. yoga, we talk about this all the time as being, essentially the energy of your soul, from prana through shakti all the way down to, jiva atma, that your reflection of consciousness. If we're gonna pull this apart and say, is it possible that whatever frequency that, Monk was vibing on, or Kid Cudi was spitting about, that, you're like, I'm listening, like I hear you, right?
Yeah, and there was something dormant in me that was awakened by it.
Do you feel when you are writing, or making music, I mean, even in your practice or your daily encounters with people, that you approach them with not necessarily a thought in your mind, but like, I'm listening? Is that part of your life? Is listening a part of your art?
Yeah, but I think this is all part of the aspect of what Moon has shown me, that is feminine intelligence. It's literally receptive intelligence. Like the moon doesn't make its own light. It's just holding an angle, like a mirror, and it's reflecting what's already there. And during my studying with you and moving deeper into yoga, I also went through this training program for how to be a trauma release therapist. And there's this profound technology in the human physiology that is listening, that is to just be with someone and then reflect back to them and be like, did I hear you correctly? And then say it back to them. And there's this, and then for somebody to be like, yes, that's what I meant. Like, there's this beautiful, profound, like, I think it goes back to permission. It's like a permission to be.
Right.
So yeah, there's a kind of an aspect of, I don't know who I'm looking at right now. I'm looking at you and Krishnamacharya, Krishnamurti, Alan Watts, and Yoganandaji. And I don't know who said it, but somebody said it was like, if you can walk around in the world and listen to, it sounds like a Rumi quote or something, but like, basically the creator is the spark in the center of every human being that you can encounter. And so in some way there is this divine intelligence. There's, whether they're a yogi or a monk or a regular human or a homeless person or a soccer mom, there's something inside of every living being that has wisdom and could potentially be that angle into life that you need to hear in that moment. And there's been times where I don't live in the Hollywood area anymore, but I was living right in Hollywood and Vine area for a while. And there were several times where I would just sit next to a person who was like, on the street with the cup, looking for change, and it'd turn into a conversation. And I really have felt like you just never know who has what wisdom. I remember I saw that post on your feed. I don't know where it was, but it was like a profound wisdom coming from that dude. I think his name was Hallelujah. And it's like, you just never know who has the insight that you might need in that particular moment in life. So yeah.
Yeah, I was just cruising around, Miami at the time, and so many homeless people right outside of this area that's, called Wynwood. Wynwood's a made-up name, actually. It was all part of Overtown, and these predominantly guys live in this little section called Devil's Triangle. And I was like, just cruising around here. People are taking pictures of themselves in front of, murals and doing handstands or whatever they're doing, doing this stuff. I was like, what the hell, and these guys are sitting on the sidewalk. I'm not saying everyone did that, because honestly, I spent probably like a month with these guys, like almost every day. I'd even like ride with my daughter through, and we would stop and talk to a couple guys, buy them food, and be like, where are you guys going? So they became kind of like, more friends or what have you. Some people I became close to. Some people, you can't connect to all people. But I think it's interesting what you say, because when we start to talk about the things we believe in, and you put this really nicely, is, whether it's this person hanging out on the street or, soccer mom. And I think this is really cool because, we tend to like, oh yeah, this person does yoga, and, they were, they initiated by this person, or this person is an amazing, musician or a well-known artist or whatever it is. But no one says, I have this awesome person. She's so like, it's totally soccer mom. She's totally soccer mom, but she speaks the truth, right? And it's like, it's really interesting in how we actually validate. I mean, even use this word that I actually try not to use a lot, which is like, the idea that there's feminine and masculine energy, because even that to me is like, I think that what was initially meant by that in theory is that there was a negative and positive charge, one that was like stable and one that was, less stable, and that together they made a current. But we tend to like really weave that thread, and classically you can also see examples where that has also been done too. But I think it's so interesting to say that we can find truth from in any direction. I don't know if a lot of people see that, you can find that connection. Here's the new album and it's by Thelonious Moon. Here's the copyright. It says, all rights belong to you. But shouldn't it say like ... and also to Jiva Atma?
Yeah.
Right, because you just said like any energy that comes from you is really the energy of creation. So whatever you want to call that energy, and we go around in our lives constantly identifying with I and the ego and this is mine and I did this and I did these things. And I know that you're not saying that, but I think it's really cool that you brought that division up, because we tend to look at it in a particular way. We glorify spiritual teachers as if they're, priests or cardinals or whatever it may be, rather than people who are trying to walk the path. We even use that word like instructor rather than a teacher, which to me is like it's like nails on a chalkboard, if you will. It's like, you don't instruct people unless you're like trying to show them to do something quite particular. But when you teach people, you show them how to do that, and we integrate our, living arrangement. That's why I always say I'm a yoga educator. I'm not a yoga teacher. It's either a yoga educator or a pet psychologist. Those are the two options, right? But how do you keep your mind from not, going into the dive? I mean, I know how I do it, but how do you do it?
Man, I really struggled with that before I found sadhana, before I found like an everyday energetic equalizer. I would, do my best to keep myself sane. I think art has always been my life raft, and that's a fun analogy. So before I found yoga, my life raft was like the wooden door from Titanic, and it just seemed like there wasn't that much. It's like there wasn't that much room on it, and then after incorporating, well, I think yoga as a system of amplifying well-being, I'll call it that for now, it kind of gave me permission to bring in other things. And I saw Bruce Lee did the same thing with Jeet Kune Do, and it's like, utilize what's helpful for real, and maybe adding some qigong or just straight up kind of bringing in a workout into a yoga practice. All of a sudden it was just this like adherence to my own system's needs to function ideally and function properly. So I would say exporting is really important. Importing is really important. So like exporting for me is, journaling. Any kind of art is, as alchemy itself of like, checking in where I'm at, but also vibrating the vocal cords. I think journaling is like a really potent alchemy tool, which I'm mentioning a lot in Moon Theory and in this online course. It's like you're really reflecting with yourself, just in slow motion kind of. I think typing is different, but importing, having, inspiring content, maybe going to another, galaxy far, far away for 2 hours, and then integrating. And whether that's through pranayama or asana or, kriya, it's been literally the transformation of my 20s. Of like, if I look at my journey from like the decade of my 20s, first 5 years was just trying to make as much art as possible, really didn't think about wellness that much. At 24, I got adrenal fatigue, mononucleosis, and basically they're like, this is a type of Epstein-Barr. It could lead to like permanent damage of your adrenal glands if you don't shift. And I was like, what? Then I kind of found this shamanic thing. I never heard about shamans before I was 25, really. And then all of a sudden met this dude, and he was like, yeah, ayahuasca. I was like, what do you mean? And I worked with that medicine, and it showed me, you have a house. If you don't sweep it, dust accumulates. Don't be mad if your dishes have dust on them when you go to eat food. And so I was like, all right, well, what do I need to do to, what are my upkeep for real? Because my mom and dad, they have their own kind of regimen, and I've seen people find different ways to keep themselves lifted. My mom loves working out in a way that really works for her. I'm not as called to doing Zumba and the things that she does. My dad loves hunting. My dad loves doing these things that I'm not super called to. So for me, yeah, it was like yoga really glued it all together. As like, you're in the same spacesuit every day. How do you, make it work for the things that you want to do in the best way possible?
Yeah,
Otherwise,
that's awesome.
yeah.
There's when I was studying Siddha for a period of time, the teacher that I was studying with would talk about, there's lots of ways to elevate the mind. We can do yoga, we can contemplate, we can reflect, we can get into this wonderful process that you laid out of, exporting, importing, integration, and, keeping a balance there, right? Moving with your Dharma is obviously one of those things where we reduce some of the struggle, but it doesn't take away the friction of following your Dharma, right? Your Dharma is still active. We talked about that earlier in the conversation about the fork in the road. But one of the things that he said that was, is mind-boggling, in some ways we think is, just totally odd. And there's a lot of studies on just the idea of like humming and like how it, just in general, like humming and how it like will change the nervous system and stuff. But one of the things he said is like, think of a ridiculous sound, and it's impossible to have a negative thought in a ridiculous sound. So we'll say something like, bum bum, it's like, how can you have any of those feelings? And it's not like that you're trying to move the feelings, but it's trying to get you to understand that, the feelings are generated from thoughts within the mind, right? And how we interpret in the world. So something like completely ridiculous that elevates the mind. And it reminds me that sometimes, when you and I have a conversation, you make this sound at the beginning of our conversation, sometimes at the end of our conversation. And I've always been curious, do you make that sound to keep your mind elevated?
Wait, which is the sound?
You do a little like from the beginning of your calls. And I'm just,
Wow.
I thought of this. I was like, this is really interesting. I don't know if Rocco was even conscious that he's, he is using this sound as a tool, or it's just, a cool little whatever,
Wow.
just a call out of some sort. But I was like, does he use this sound just to, elevate his mind?
Okay,
It's
well,
interesting.
this goes in a very cool direction. I'm so glad.
All right, awesome.
I'm so glad it went this direction. So the fastest way into like the fastest answer to that is DMT. And the second part is that tattoo, which is basically just a raven, but it kind of looks like it might be a crow. And
Okay.
and then I have 2 hummingbirds on my abdomen, my solar plexus.
Okay.
And I got the raven in 2014 before I met those medicines. I got the solar plexus and after I met those medicines. I remember being a young kid, and it was something actually my dad and I would really connect on, because he somehow, dude, he can't hear you when you want to talk to him, but he can tell you what kind of bird that is, where it's from, what it looks like, what the male looks like, and what the female looks like, if they have migration patterns. And I was so fascinated by birds, and I was also the colors and something about birds. Fast forward to 25-year-old Rocco, in an ayahuasca ceremony in Topanga Canyon, wearing all white at 3 a.m. And this hummingbird that I'm pretty sure if I put my hand out, it wasn't an actual hummingbird, but a hummingbird came right to my face, and it, you know, and it kind of just purred into me. But while the hummingbird was looking at me, there was this jaguar that was kind of purring into my ear. And I was like, whoa, this is a wild vibration. I know two, quote unquote, ayahuasca shamans, and they're the only two people that I've heard make, well, I guess there's another third one, but I don't know him as close. But there's this some kind of like whistle, purr, cat, bird, cat, like whisper noise, and it somehow like grabs air and then drops it and then presents it. It's like a bow. It's like a bow with the tongue and mouth and jaw. And I think there's also something like the flutter of it reminds the heart of what it's doing. And I mean, anybody who's grown up, you know, been around a cat, I know you got a cat. There's something so peaceful when a cat is just purring, you know, near you or on you. So I think I might have a totally different answer for you in 10 years, but that's where it is right now. And it kind of,
that's awesome.
It's just become like a you know, a drop-in moment kind of thing, I guess. Yeah, an anchor.
I love it. I'm sorry, those of you that are not like looking at your comments. I'm just trying to, you know, be engaged with Rocco. But
Yeah.
one of my friends on here, old friend of mine, Hunter's on here, right? You know, writing questions like frequency tuning question. You know, and you guys should actually meet each other, Rocco and Hunter. You guys, I think, would be able to talk for like probably 4 years without missing a beat. But yeah, I think that's what we're all looking at, is this idea that, you know, we look at these complicated things in life, and really they're kind of signs of, you know, contentment or connection are like all the way around you. And, you know, Rocco, thank you so much for sharing all of your, you know, time with me this morning and this afternoon, evening for you. You guys, please, you know, check out Rocco. He's awesome. Obviously, if you're just catching on to this conversation, go in the beginning. You can just if you can fast forward all the parts that I'm talking about. Rocco will deliver you on this journey. Check him out on Instagram, and please listen to his music. And I'm sure he's more than happy to engage with you. Thank you, Rocco, so much. I really appreciate your time, brother. And we'll talk soon. Yeah.
Yeah, brother. Thank you.
All right.